join us for this discussion. Don't click on anything, just join the call and stay with us for a few seconds until we get this discussion going. I'm going to wait for another half minute or so, and then we can get ready. We'll have people joining on Zoom and I think on YouTube and on social media following this discussion. People who want to ask questions through the Q&A function will have to join the Zoom call, just so you are aware of this. And with this, I think it's time to start this discussion. It's really my great pleasure to welcome you today to this event discussing the future of the SDGs with international experts and with members of the European Parliament. The title of our event today is 2030 and Beyond, the Road to Sustainable Development. And my name is Michael Broning. I'm the director of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation in New York. And before we start, I wanted to extend a quick thank you to the people who made this possible, to our team here in New York, but also the team in Brussels, Volker, Lina, Lennart. Thanks for doing this. And of course, everyone who joined us today, a very warm welcome from New York. A special extra thank to Lennart, who unfortunately got struck with a quarantine because his partner caught COVID, and now the person who had to arrange all the technicalities is in a sealed room. And so if things don't work out quite as smoothly, we know what to blame, not Lennart, but the virus. So with this, fingers crossed that this will all work smoothly. I think it's obvious that we are talking about a very timely topic. As you are aware, next week we'll bring the high-level political forum to the city where people will take stock of what has been or has not been accomplished with regards to the Agenda 2030. But obviously the topic is also timely because of the world in which we live, which is a world that is defined by an escalation of military force that was unexpected, to say the least. And I think it's clear that the rules-based international order is not exactly in good shape. Good governance, global governance is under threat, and it's probably not too much of an exaggeration to say that every grenade that explodes in the Donbass explodes twice, once in Ukraine, but once also in what we like to call the rules-based international order. Yesterday, we had an event here discussing the future of the United Nations, and I asked the UN watcher what he thinks the impact of the war in Ukraine will be for global governance, for the opportunity, for the chances of humanity to confront these questions. And his reply was, well, it is a terrible distraction. And I think while that is certainly true, it is also what strikes me to be a massive understatement, a massive euphemism, because if what is happening is a distraction with regards to the Agenda 23, then it is a distraction when you are hit by a Class 8 truck. This is what we are seeing these days. And the bitter truth, obviously, is that we have about 8 years to accomplish the goals that have been outlined in the agenda. And when we are being honest, hardly anyone is on track. Also, COVID built back better rhetoric, didn't really go much beyond rhetoric. And now the war, of course, has made attaining the objectives even more unlikely. I'm unaware of an SDG that calls for higher military spending and lower development investment. So that is the world that we are living in, or maybe not. Maybe I'm being overly pessimistic, which is why we are having this discussion today. And I'm really looking forward to this exchange and to what our experts from Brussels, the United States and beyond have to say. Quick technical note, please don't hesitate to ask questions in the Q&A. And another quick note, we will have to stop 5 minutes early because we have to run to our next appointment. With this, over to you, Udo, and you will hear from me back later. Thank you.
Yes, hello to everybody, and thanks a lot, Michael and your team, for having us today. We are here with three members of European Parliament from the Socialists and Democrats group, from the Progressives. That is Erwin Ince from Sweden. That is Carsten Lucke from Germany, and myself, Udo Bullmann. All of us are very active in foreign affairs and development policies, in trade. We are looking for two decisive questions. First of all, we know that if we have a solution, if we can get a solution to this multiple crisis on the globe, we need to use the SDGs, we need to use the Sustainable Development Framework as our political holistic compass, and we are dedicated to doing that. So how far did we get? What can we do to improve for the last years of possible achievements until 2030? And secondly, we saw that COVID-19, that a new polarization between rich and poor on the globe, that this war, not only in the Ukraine, but military conflicts in general, are pushing us back on the agenda, and that our partners in the global south are becoming more and more in need on the one hand, but important for us to bring them to the table as partners on equal footing on the other hand. So where is the global south in this new setting after the Ukraine war? What do we have to do as the global north, especially as the European Union, to stretch our hand and to support mutual supportive development? These are the two questions we are following. We're more than happy today to have leading experts of the international debate with us. Let me welcome Jeffrey Sachs, University Professor and Director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. Today, not in New York, as you may see on the screen. Jeff is a long-standing friend of the progressives in Europe, and has been with us, leading us and inspiring us already for many, many years. And he has also leading the Sustainable Development Support Network, in which Phoebe Konduri, University Professor at Athens University, is a co-leading personality. With her we have been working already for many, many years. Welcome to Jeff and welcome to Phoebe. And our third international expert is Jimena Liva-Roche, head of the Peace and Sustainable Development Program of the International Peace Institute here in New York. So we are looking forward to having an exciting debate where our experts are going to inspire us, and I'll leave it up to Jeff to lead and to kick off the political debate on the Sustainable Development Strategy. How far did we get, and what do we have urgently to do against the backdrop of all the international crises that hit the globe? Jeff, please come in.
Udo, thank you very much. Great to be with you, with Phoebe, Michael, with everybody. Thank you so much, and greetings from Sorrento this afternoon. So I'm delighted to be able to join this way. Let me be very brief and to the point. First, the SDG agenda is a political success in that it has been incorporated into almost every government's policies around the world. I serve in many UN capacities. I visit dozens of countries each year. The SDG agenda is present almost everywhere, number one. Number two, it's far off track. We will not achieve the SDGs by 2030 almost anywhere. Europe is unquestionably ahead of the rest of the world in the SDG agenda. Each year, the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network that I lead is publishing a sustainable development report. We just published ours a couple of weeks ago. The top 18 ranked countries on SDG achievement are all European. The top 24 of 25 countries, with Japan being the only non-European country, otherwise are all European countries. Europe is way in the lead. Third, the European Green Deal is the real thing. Please implement it. And more importantly for Europe, please work with every other regional body in the world. with the African Union, with ASEAN, with the CELAC, with the groupings all over the world, so that there are green deals in the holistic sense that Europe has adopted it all over the world. The next point is that the last 3 years, of course, have been retrogression. The pandemic was a very serious hit. I'll add in a footnote that I think there is a reasonable chance that this virus emerged out of US biotechnology, out of secret research that we don't know yet because of the non-transparency of the US government. If that surprises you, I published a recent paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which you can look at, which describes the reasons for deep worry that US biotechnology may have been the source of this virus. I personally think it's odds on, but whatever I think, it definitely needs a deep investigation. Europe should be calling for not only transparency of China, but of the United States, which has hidden from view what it was doing. The second major debacle, of course, is the war in Ukraine. Putin started the war, but the United States provoked the war in a very serious way. And it provoked the war through NATO enlargement. And unfortunately, Europe has gone silent on this point, because in 2008, when George W. Bush Jr. proposed to expand NATO eastward to Ukraine and Georgia, European leaders were aghast. They knew that this was reckless. They knew that it was in complete violation of what Hans-Dietrich Genscher told Gorbachev in 1990, not an inch to the east. And yet the United States wanted to surround Russia in the Black Sea. This is a replay of the Crimean War, I'm sorry to say. Our media don't care, they don't report it, they don't understand it, but the United States was a provocateur in this war. And if Europe wants sustainable development, it should say to its US partner, back off. We are going to have a neutral Ukraine. We are not going to expand NATO further. I personally am unhappy that Finland and Sweden are joining NATO, because they are the superlative countries that have shown what neutrality can mean and can accomplish. And it's a shame. It doesn't have to be this way. But the United States neoconservative movement wants NATO everywhere, including in Asia now. And just today, China warned, do not create an Asian NATO. But for my progressive friends in Europe, I'm telling you, the United States is not in control. Finally, to really achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, two major things are needed. First, more time. And here I want to make a very practical suggestion. We will have the big meeting next year. At the big meeting, we should make clear that the SDGs remain our framework until mid-century. That's not turning in the homework late. That is being realistic, that we need sustainable development goals carried to mid-century. For example, the whole European Green Deal is dated to mid-century. I don't want us to adopt a third agenda, first the Millennium Development Goals, then the Sustainable Development Goals, and then something else after 2030. The SDGs are working politically. They are embedded, they are complex, but they are being adopted into policy. So let's stick with them. And even in 2023, make clear that this is a unified global agenda to mid-century for decarbonization, for carrying out green deals, for protecting biodiversity, for achieving social justice, not to slow the clock, but to recognize that even were we to proceed at maximal speed to 2030, a lot of the agenda will remain, and let's not shift the agenda. Let us have an agenda. So the final, oops, Udo, Did you
Yeah.
call her, Sonia? Yeah, sorry, I had a call coming in. So can you still hear me? Yes. Let me
Yes,
just
we
finish
do.
up then. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, I had an incoming call, which I thought blocked me. Just a final point. So agenda to 2050, final point, to really succeed, we need to shift about $1 trillion a year, or a little less than 1% of world outputs in the developing countries. And the announcement by the G7 a couple of days ago of the future investment is a good part of that. It is a $600 billion investment over 5 years, or 120 billion a year. It's a modest piece of what we need, but it's a good piece. So this PGII is an example of policies that we need to increase investments in electrification, with renewable energy, with digitalization, with the all children in school, because believe it or not, we have hundreds of millions of school-age kids not in school because governments can't afford to provide upper secondary school in the poor countries, and so on. So the final plank is a major expansion of investment, and the major institutions to do that are the public development banks, like KfW, like the Finance Corporation, like the European Investment Bank, like the EBRD, like the World Bank, like the African Development Bank. It's not going to come from private capital markets. It's going to come through public in 5 to 10 times the scale that they have been operating. But they can do that. And we in the developed countries should put our focus not on billion here, billion there of bilateral aid. We should put our focus on a massive expansion of finance through public development banking. Final word, I promise. We need to end this war. We need to end the war by saying that NATO will not enlarge and Russia goes home. That's been the basis all along for peace, but the United States has refused to say the truth. The US and the UK want to push NATO enlargement. This is our deepest mistake, and we will not achieve sustainable development until we stop the idea of US hegemony, which is unfortunately deeply embedded in US foreign policy. So let me stop there with a few quick remarks and back over to you, Udo.
Thanks so much, Jeffrey Sachs. We lost you a couple of seconds, but nonetheless, your message is absolutely clear. And we know you as a very courageous voice for showing us in each and every detail that sustainability and peacekeeping are twinned, and that we cannot deviate the one from the other. We know that there are more than one view on the situation in the Ukraine and the history of the conflict. That will be perhaps raised also in the comments of our audience and in the comments of the MEPs. But let us start already with the good message. We have had a conversation with the Italian ambassador yesterday, who is the chief negotiator for the compromise on the resolution for the high-level political forum in a couple of days. And he exactly underlined what you are demanding, that there will be an agreement not to deviate from the sustainability strategy as our political compass for the forthcoming decades. There is already, we have still struggle in detail, but there is already an overall agreement, as you rightly point out, to prolong this agenda until the mid of our century. And I cannot imagine any other message that might be useful, because we have this holistic program already, and it does not have to be redefined. We only have to better and to quicker implement. And we had also another very interesting interesting conversation with Cristina Duarte, the special envoy for Africa and former finance minister from Capo Verde, working closely also with Antonio Guterres on the Africa strategy. And she made completely clear to us, don't puzzle around. Most of the problems arise because we have an absence of public policy, because we have an absence of the state in various regions of this world, and that has to be our starting point. So go back to democratic institution building, go back to public policy capacity building, and then you will be able to solve all the other problems. But Phoebe, it's now your turn. Please come in and give us, I know that you are a very holistic researcher on the achievements of the SDGs all over the world, especially in Europe. What can you tell us about the achievements and those things we have to do in detail?
Yes. Udo, thank you so much for having me here. It's always a pleasure to interact with you, with people that are affiliated with you. And of course, it's always an inspiration to interact with Jeff. I am in Rimini at a conference, at the annual conference of the European Association of Environmental and Resource Economists. This is the biggest association in the world of environmental economists. And one of our opening lectures was by the finance minister of Italy, Daniele Franco. And he discussed, and actually we had an interactive section, exactly what Jeff said and what you just said, that Agenda 2030 really needs to be Agenda 2050. As Jeff says, and I agree, this is an agenda that allows us to base on it an investment program that is consistent with the heterogeneity of each nation. So this is an agenda on which each nation can base an investment program that can allow the nation to make the transition to sustainability with regards to its finances, with regards to socioeconomics, and with regards to environmental footprint by 2050. It's true, Europe is working on 2050. And I believe that at the moment, at least in Europe, we are building the capacity that allows us to be confident that by 2050, we will be able to meet most of these goals. So yes, we should stick to this. We are building capacity in Europe and beyond. And we don't need additional negotiations for another agenda, another global agenda. Let me show you how the results in terms of our ability to respond to this agenda look. We know that we have many problems. We have the pandemic, the recession, the climate change crisis, the biodiversity collapse, the population crisis, the energy crisis, the one that has been aggravated by the war, the geopolitical crisis, the food crisis. So with the senior working group of SDSN on the joint implementation of SDGs and the European Green Deal, we set to answer the question, how much of this big number of policies, directives, the taxonomy, the Fit for 55, the climate law, together with the financial instruments, Next Generation EU, the budget of the European Green Deal, the budget of the cohesion funds, how much of these European policies is really able to implement the 17 SDGs and the 169 goals within them. It's quite important to understand what the European Green Deal is able to do, what is not so good in doing, and be able to support further the structure of the European green policies with additional policies and additional funding. And I'm going to talk about where the funding is going to come from in order to provide a leadership example for the transition. It is also important for Europe to talk with Africa, to talk with Global South, to talk with other continents. But let's first focus on the achievement of Europe. What is Europe doing well? First of all, is implementing policies and regulations. And this is important because the pledges are not enough. You need to transpose the pledges into policies and regulation and provide the financing and the capacity, the knowledge, the skills in order to do the implementation. So what we did, we gathered all the European Green Deal policies together with the digital policies, together with the Fit for 55 policies, together with the policies that have to do with funding the recovery for coffee, and we cross-mapped them against the SDGs. So the main results is that the European Green Deal is very efficient with regards to SDGs that have to do with climate action, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, affordable and clean energy, responsible consumption, production, and decent work, and economic growth. And when we grouped the efficiency of European policies into the 6 transformation pathways that SDSN announced in 2019 in order to operationalize the implementation of the SDGs, that is education, gender inequality, transformation on health, well-being, and demography, energy decarbonization, sustainable management of food, land, water, and oceans, sustainable cities and communities, and the digital revolution for sustainable development. This is what we find. And this is interesting. The European Green Deal is quite efficient in supporting the transformation of sustainable food, land, water, and oceans, and energy decarbonization and sustainable industry. It's performing well with regards to sustainable cities and communities and the digital revolution, but is very weak on education, gender inequality, health, well-being, and demography. This means that the European Green Deal is very weak with regards to policies that support social cohesion. And we all know, both from research, but also from experience, that no transformation is possible without social cohesion and without giving the society the capacity to actively engage in the transformation. And that is why it is very important for the SDGs to be prioritized in the implementation of the European Green Deal. It's a more holistic framework, a more secure framework, and the two, the SDGs and the European Green Deal, have to find the optimal way to jointly frame the policy, the finances, and the final transformation. And this is why I like very much what Enrico Giovannini is doing, because what he's doing is that he says, okay, I'm going to implement the European Green Deal, I'm going to implement the investments according to the policies and directives of the European Green Deal, but I'm going to assess each and every one of these policies against the SDGs, just to make sure that I get the holistic, integrated, interdisciplinary framework that allows me to support the transition with policies that are possible, implementable, they are acceptable by the society has the capacity to implement them, and also I have the financial means to do so. Let me very quickly also show you, not these slides, but very quickly show you what the recovery and resilience plans are doing, especially in the difficult region of Southern Europe. This is the 750 billion in addition to the European Union multi-annual financial framework, financing investments that are climate and digital mainstream. what we find is that the recovery and resilient plans of the 7 Southern European countries, which make up 50% of the total EU recovery grants, they address the SDGs at different degrees. However, the SDGs that are covered by the investments that are financed by the recovery and resilience plans are not the ones where we have the lowest performance in terms of the implementation of the SDGs. So we have a lot of financing for green energy, electrification of transport, energy efficiency measures, but much less on food systems and diets and biodiversity, which are SDGs where Europe is underperforming. And this, of course, allows us to make a recommendation that the cohesion funds that are coming in addition to RFFs should be diverted to biodiversity. And because of that, I think the exercise that we did in this report, trying to monetize the conservation of biodiversity in terms of monetizing the ecosystem services of natural capital is important, because it's important to know the value of natural capital, not just produce capital, not just human capital, but also natural capital across Europe, and be sure that you are integrating this value of ecosystem services in your investment allocation decisions. And for those of you that are interested, you can see our work. We derive the monetary value for different ecosystems, terrestrial, marine, and freshwater ecosystems for all the biogeographical and marine regions in Europe. And we were able to show not just how much each country is willing to pay for different ecosystem services, but also show that the countries that are able to perform well with regards to their SDGs are those that are able to integrate the value of natural capital into their investment decisions. And this is important on how we want to communicate this transition to sustainability to the people that are making decisions on investments. And I think this should not only concern public institutions only, but also businesses and the financial institutions. It is quite important to increase capacity in understanding how important it is to integrate not just produce capital value, but also natural capital and human capital and even social capital in your assessment. I will close here by saying that even if we become fully sustainable tomorrow, is not enough. We need to care about the global south. All of you know that the poorest countries in the world are the richest countries in biodiversity. So through evaluation of ecosystem services and natural capital, we have a very nice angle to promote, in addition to all the things that Jeff and Udo has said, to promote fiscal instruments that can support the poor countries in terms of GDP, but rich countries in terms of biodiversity, to really engage in this transition. I will stop here and come back later.
Thanks very much, Phoebe. You presented a masterpiece of political research and assessment on what has happened to the sustainability strategy all over the European countries, and it's enriching our debate in a way that we can make profit from that much beyond our current debate today. There is the takeaway that we need to watch on the Green Deal, that we do not underestimate the social dimension, because the social dimension is giving the capacity for the new fabric of the development model, though that is one of the most important takeaways. And once you concluded with the paradigm that, let me phrase it like that, the wealth of nations is in the global south, given its biodiversity and also the capacity of its young people, of the next generation. You are leading us already into the international debate beyond the findings for Europe. And here our worries are always that we are, because we are the rich ones on the globe, that we are advancing quicker than others, but still that the spillovers of the legacy of our development model are so negative that we do not support partner countries to follow on the track to sustainability, but rather hinder them from doing that. And that has to be altered by changing our systems of trade and development policy and agriculture and many other policy fields. Allow me please to quickly bring in my colleagues from Sweden and from Germany. Evan Inche, do you have a quick comment for the state of the debate so far?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I also, as you would agree on many of the things that have been said, and it is indeed, the SDGs are indeed very important. I mentioned it a couple of times during these days of meetings that we have had here in New York, but I think it's always worthy to maybe mention it again, that I was once, or I'm quoting Jan Eliasson, who is one of the former Deputy Secretary Generals of the UN, who once said that the SDGs are a toolkit to save humanity, and that I think portrays very well on what the SDGs actually can do, together with the Paris Agreement, of course. And one important aspect that I actually would like to just highlight also would be the aspect of the gender perspective, that we also know that when looking at how poverty, how the climate change, how inequalities at large affects the society, we see that it affects the already vulnerable groups in the society. And we also know that when we bring women out of poverty, we also bring families out of poverty, and we also ensure economic growth in the societies. Then of course we need to ensure that the economic growth is also at the same time distributed equally. So indeed the SDGs are really a toolkit that I think are important, and as I think Sachs already in the beginning said, we have only 8 years to 2030, and there is no point of creating something that really works already. We could, of course, created a new thing that already there is no point to create something new when there is something that already works. So we should learn from what has been working and what has not been working and strengthen it, but to ensure that the 17 Sustainable Development Goals actually will not stop working on until the 2030, but rather also post 2030, because 8 years goes very fast, and we have seen already how the last 7 years has rapidly passed by us. And I think, yeah, most of the very important inputs have been said, and it will, as for us as the S&D group in the European Parliament, the SDGs are very important, and it's the main goal that we have set together with the Udo in the leadership as the main priority during this mandate. But I also know that it was the same during the last mandate, and it will be important for us to continue this important work. And with this said, very much thanks to the speakers for taking your time and giving your inputs that will be very important for us to bring back to our work in the European Parliament.
Thank you very much, Evin. I now give Carsten the opportunity to jump in.
Yes, thank you, Udo, for giving me the floor. And I would like to just throw in 3 bullet points, which is like this listening, learning, and being practical. And I would like to reconnect to what Jeffrey said, because he said like these 18 countries from Europe are in the lead, and Europe in general is in the lead. And to be honest, I don't mind to be in the lead in the first place, but I don't mind only if we don't forget to listen and learn also from the Global South. And this is something, because you were also, Jeffrey, connecting to the war in Ukraine and recent debates in recent months and weeks. I experienced that the focus in Europe was very much on Europe, and there was like this crisis about the grain and the commodities that we opened up our mind a little bit, and also media coverage to the Global South, because the war also affected this. But we also have to do, when we talk about the SDGs, to do this in a broader sense, and while walking towards 2030. So being in the lead is a good thing, but only if you don't forget all the others, and yeah, be like maybe a shining example, and embrace all the others, meaning the Global South, and doing stuff with them, and bringing in also their perspectives, and also like not to measure with our own scale. So we have to take into account the concrete reality and situations of the different countries in the Global South. So not everyone is the same, and we have to take this into considerations when we are walking towards achieving the SDGs. And also the second point I would like to raise is like this being practical. I mean, we have to be aware not to evaluate too much and forget about being practical in the end. Even though we are on a long run, and even if we extend to 2050 with the SDGs, it's always good to, in between, also look on what we have achieved already, make it visible, and also push this one forward, so that we can reconnect to this, and broaden these experience we have already achieved. I think this is something we don't have to forget, and I would like to leave it with these two comments here, and I'm looking forward for questions and discussions here. Thank you very much.
So thanks all of you that have spoken so far. I now have the pleasure to hand back to Michael. Michael, who has an eye on the audience, those who follow us and raise questions, and is also going to bring in our third extremely prominent voice in the discussion. Jimena will bring in her views in a sec. Michael, what do you see in the audience? Can you take over for the second round?
Sure, my pleasure, Udo. Thank you. Well, first of all, I think that anybody who sort of was concerned that this would be an overly technical discussion was shaken out of this belief by Jeff's statement and reminder on the, on the repercussions of the war, and the reminder that there cannot be sustainable development in a world steeped in conflict and open war. I think that's a very important reminder. I don't think I'm overstepping my line as a moderator when I point out that some statements concerning who is to blame, I think, is definitely open for discussion, but that's what we're here for. And I think that we are going to look into the repercussions of the war into the next panel. And obviously it's a salient question. With regards to the Q's and A's, I think Carsten just mentioned that, being practical is called for. And if I read one question in the Q&A correctly, it is a question of how practical should we be with regards to nuclear power to become a solution in confronting climate change and the climate crisis. And obviously that's a question that is more challenging for some social democrats, it seems, than for others. This is, of course, not only heated debate in Germany, but maybe one of the panelists wants to address this question. You are certainly invited to do so. Otherwise, I would suggest we try to keep the leading question for the second part of the discussion in mind, which is, what is the role of the Global South after the war in Ukraine, and how can the cards be reshuffled? And it's my pleasure to invite Jimena to address us. And Jimena, of course, is, for those who don't know, is from one of really the leading think tanks here in New York that deal with global issues and global questions, and I'm looking forward to her contribution. Jimena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you all for the fantastic thinking and panel and putting this together. It's a big question, what you ask, and we're still in the war, unfortunately. It is really hard to see what will come afterwards, but what we're seeing at this moment is a very difficult situation for the South, because they've been given an ultimatum by the North or by Russia. You're with us or you're against us, right? And there's no middle ground for some small developing countries to really try to remain neutral or try to bridge build. And so it feels like a very polarizing moment for the world and a very delicate one, because unlike other wars, this one has a heightened potential for a nuclear attack. So we are in a different scenario, not seen since the Second World War. So, and this comes in the light of how, for developing countries, COVID-19 has really hit hard the fiscal space and their ability to also achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And there is a feeling of deep mistrust and injustice linked with fairness by the South that is also deepening trust issues, and it's deepening the gap between North and South. But when I was preparing for this conversation, I was thinking, well, what is the inspiration, right? Like amid this, I think, very dark moment for humanity, like what are the things that we can be inspired about? What are the lights in the moments ahead? And these 8 years are crucial. I agree that in a way we could extend the 2030 agenda to 2050, but most importantly, these 8 next years will determine whether we stay below 1.5 degrees or go beyond. If we go beyond the 1.5 threshold, we don't know what type of world we will be living. We will be living in a world where there will be no coral reefs, where food systems will completely collapse. And what we're seeing right now in terms of the food crisis would only be compounded to levels that we cannot fathom and that we're not prepared for. So in this delicate moment where we are crossing not only the humanly possible boundaries, but also crossing multiple planetary boundaries, what do? Right? We have to use the next key summits very seriously, not as talk shops. So right now we have the G7 with Germany, we have Indonesia as the G20, we have the COP, the Egyptians, and we have an incoming PGA who, with Korosi, we developed the SDGs, right? So can we use these leadership positions to advance on key aspects that can help us prepare for this future? Right? Can we use the common agenda and the next year's summit to think of bold ideas? Like, for example, can we think of a permanent body that is similar to Security Council, but much more inclusive, that would take place of the Trusteeship Council, to actually be permanently looking at climate change, to start addressing the human mobility that will ultimately be part of our day-to-day life by 2030. We have to start preparing for a very different future, and we're not there yet. We are working very, very tirelessly on loss and damage, on adaptation for the South. And as we've done in the past, as we did with 2030 Agenda and as we did with Paris, the alliance that we can create between the South and the European countries has been key. So this is one of these moments where we need leaders that can mediate between these polarizing views and can chart a way forward. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much for these very helpful remarks. I am aware that Phoebe will have to leave us shortly, but before she does, we won't let her go without asking her to share her thoughts on this question of sort of the Global South perspective. Phoebe, please go ahead.
The Global South is very important. The Global South has the people, the natural capital that will drive the global transition. What we need to make sure is to provide them, the rich countries, the strong countries, the countries that have fiscal space, but also the financial institutions that are there in order to support global development. They need to provide the Global South with the capacity to engage in this transition. The Global South has a huge potential for production, interesting production, profitable opportunities. It has a huge potential for absorbing technological advancements. So it is important that we construct a plan with them, we co-design a plan with them that will allow them to really engage in this transition, not just as consumers, but as participants in the design of the transition, in the production of the technology, and the implementation of projects, climate adaptation mitigation projects, renewable energy projects, digitalization projects, circular economy projects, huge capacity for nature-based solution projects. So they should engage in the implementation of the projects, in the production value chain of this project. And we need to be very serious to understand that there's a serious investment in education, upskilling and reskilling of the Global South should be a priority in order to allow them the engagement. And through this engagement, the benefit will not be only to the Global South, but to the global economy. So I am looking here at each and every SDG separately, but as we all know, no SDG is fully implemented without the other SDGs being fully implemented. So we need to prioritize SDG 16 and 14, peace, institutions, and collaboration, in order to enable the engagement of the Global South, that at the end of the day will allow us, the more developed, let's say, countries, the richer countries, to become climate neutral, to become climate resilient, to acquire the human capital, and also the demand for the produced technologies and projects that will allow real GDP, positive GDP growth multipliers, and also job multipliers. It is important to keep in mind not just population increases, but also movement of population due to geopolitical instability and due to climate change. So we really need to talk to the Global South and understand the difficulties, the challenges, but also the huge opportunities that are there, both for the Global South, but also for the most developed country. So the answer is sincere collaboration and co-designing of detailed strategies, detailed pathways, technological pathways, financial pathways, and policy pathways in each and every country, but also identifying the synergies and spillovers between the countries and between the continents in order to figure out the optimal strategy out of our multi-crisis world. So collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. And on this, I take this opportunity to announce that SDSN is launching a global climate hub that will support any government that is interested in having our support in detailing their systemic pathways, technological policy and financial, towards the transition to climate neutrality and climate resilience. We will be offering our services in a co-design mode with the nations, with the regions, in order to facilitate and empower the country towards this transition. thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and your audience. Thank you so much.
Phoebe, thank you so much. You are almost German in your punctuality. It's exactly 12 o'clock, so thanks for joining us. I mean, these are eminently political questions, and we have three eminent lawmakers from the European Union with us. So I'm very tempted to play the ball to them and ask them how they think about these issues. If I understand Phoebe correctly, she was pointing out that sort of upscaling the global South is called for. And then we have an interesting, I think, question from the audience, whether the G77 is still representing the global South. In other words, who is speaking for the global South? Is there such a thing as the global South? And then also, I think Phoebe reminded us that we need to get the war out of the way, so to say, which brings me back to sort of my introductory remarks about, you know, the war being a big distraction, and that being an understatement. Maybe I'm rephrasing this to say that the war is a trap. It's a deadly trap if we don't find a way out of it, because it really stops us from doing all the other important things that we need to be doing. But so another question I think that is being raised is the question of transition. And ultimately, I think for progressives, also the question of progress. And what does it mean for progressives who sort of embrace this notion of progress? Because it's politically sort of part of our DNA. You know, we want to make the world a better place, but at the same time, what we are witnessing seems to be an ever-growing disconnect between the global rhetoric and the ambitions and what we are trying to do, and then the real existing world out there that is more or less on fire. So that, of course, also has something to do with the lack of trust in political institutions to actually deliver, but also with the notion of progress itself. I mean, are we in a world where sort of progress in the public is still considered, you know, trustworthy, doable, and attractive, or is that sort of a 2008 Barack Obama thing, you know, change we can believe in and progress? I sometimes have the impression that these issues are interconnected, that when you talk about transition, you talk about political trust, and then you talk about ultimately confidence in politics to deliver. So I'm sure all these questions can be answered in one question, in one quick blow by our members of parliament, but I don't know who wants to go first. Udo, would you like to address a question from, you know, the numerous issues, I think important issues that have been raised? And I said Jimena also suggests to have a comment, maybe after Udo, Jimena, would that be possible?
Well, Michael, this is quite a challenge that you answer the crucial questions of this world in one response. I'm confessing I'm completely unable doing that, but I give it a try. Is there the global South? No, the global South is very heterogeneous. We have been speaking to the representative for Pakistan yesterday here in the facilities of the EU representation of the United Nations on invitation of the EU ambassador. We had with us the ambassadors from Indonesia, next to Pakistan, also South Africa, Senegal, and Malawi. We were listening to different voices, and what the EU has understood is, and we take that on board, now it's time to listen. It's not only time to take the lead on this and that, this is worthwhile doing it, but it's time to listen. We need to understand what are the major problems of new energy flows, how can we support the countries in Africa and Latin America and Asia in building up sustainable energy structures. We need to look for corridors of progressive intervention. Is there something like a progressive message? Yes. If we start from the global picture of sustainability and SDGs, then we need corridors of intervention. Energy, sustainable energy infrastructure and production is one of them. Education is another. Healthcare is the third one. Empowering people, especially women and girls, to also take the lead in their regions and to go to the forefront in building up the future of tomorrow is another one. So we have to get real. the thing is to develop partnerships to get real and not only to talk headlines. We are very often good in headlines, but we are not of the same professionalism when it comes to implementation. And here starts also our work in the European Parliament. We have major new instruments, financial frameworks called Global Gateway or Global Europe or whatever. Here we have to ensure that these projects for the next 5-7 years, Jimena mentioned the necessity to do the turnaround during the next 8 years, that they are really used and they are mobilizing all available capacities, and that they are used in the ownership of the southern countries and their societies. And here we have to support all progress that is possible. And in our function as parliamentarians, we have to scrutinize what the European Union is doing. Are we really fulfilling our promises? Are we really doing what we have to do? Or is there cheap talk and we have to improve the instruments and their implementation? That is very necessary. Phoebe and Jeff, thanks again for being with us. I do not know whether they still can hear us. Very profitable, worthwhile interventions. Jeff mentioned development banks, the multilateral ones. Yes, but they have to follow policy first, people first approach, not self-interest in their institutions. That has to be the concrete goal of our parliamentary intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Udo. And I think the question of sort of who speaks for the South that was addressed by you, Udo, also invites a comment from Jimena. So please go ahead, Jimena, your 5 cents on who speaks for the Global South. And then I don't know if our Evan and Carsten would like to add on to that. Otherwise, we have another question.
Thank you, and I'm glad I'm speaking after Udo, because I think that message of it's time to listen is, I think, well taken, and I think it's a really good approach in terms of how to start dealing with this kind of new world order, and to really understand where are the openings for change, for positive change, right? So I think that is the right approach. In terms of who speaks from the South, as a former G77 colleague for many years, you know, it has ebbed and flowed. When we were in the midst of Paris, the G77, at least for the climate space, the G77 exploded into multiple small groupings. It was a period of great disarray for the South, because on mitigation, on how to separate the carbon budget, we were at odds. But now in the climate space, the South is becoming again a bit more unified on issues on loss and damage and adaptation. And so it comes and goes in cycles. As well for the SDGs, Guatemala and Colombia were the countries that broke the G77 consensus, and there was no EU either for the SDG negotiation. So we had to break the blocks to get to the SDGs. But again, so there's moments where the South is united and can speak on in one voice. And then there's moments where the South is in China, India, Brazil, the big players are in complete load headers with small island developing states and vulnerable countries. So it's a question that has many implications, but on questions of finance, adaptation, poverty, I think that the South is starting to be speaking as a bloc again.
I mean, thank you so much, Jimena. I think that also sort of is a question that's very pertinent to other global groupings. And last but not least, I think to the United Nations themselves, where sort of one of the key moments in the last few months for me personally speaking was this, looking at the General Assembly vote after the Russian aggression and trying to find out, okay, who stands where, and then realizing slowly that this notion of global outrage that is unprecedented is a bit of a European impression as well. And that was one of the harder moments, I think, for many UN watchers in New York to understand that, yeah, well, not all is as it seems at all times. So, Carsten, over to you. Feel free to comment on any of the issues that were raised. In particular, of course, the question whether European members of parliament speak different languages, but also can listen in different languages.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And I also wanted to reconnect what you were just asking in your comments, because like, what are the progressive agenda for these times right now? And I think from a European perspective and also from a German perspective, especially after these the last 30 years we had after the breakdown of the USSR, and we all thought like democracy will prevail. We heard about this end of history and everything, but now the Ukraine war was like really like a focal point, bringing us really back down to reality. We hear a lot of a wake-up call that the Europeans have received, and I think this brings especially the progressive politics back on the agenda, because if not now, when then? So because Udo already mentioned in bullet points very much the challenges we have ahead, and also if I might add up on this, we're talking about polarization in our societies. We have seen this even in so-called Western democracy, that not everything is fine anymore, talking about the US, but also member states of the European Union. And even in Germany, we have received extremist parties back to our parliaments, and democracy in general on the global scale is decreasing. So, I mean, we heard it already a couple of times here in recent days, but also in this online talk today, that the world is kind of on fire. And I mean, in the end, this is what life is about. You solve a problem, and then it's not like heaven for the rest of the day, but you know the next problem is around the corner, and it's about solving these problems. And I think this is the crucial thing where we as social democrats and as progressive politicians have to contribute really to bring the general headline of leaving no one behind, and reading this is adding to many aspects, but this is a really good headline, leaving no one behind, from the individual, but also up to nation states and then to the global community. That is why we need progressive policy, especially in these times of crisis, because I think if we leave it to other people, then we might not change the world for the better. And then maybe my last point on that, because you also, Michael, issued this question from the chat. I don't want to chilly around here on the nuclear issue. Of course, we in Germany, we have 3 plants that we would like to end by the end of the year. But also here, bringing me back to my thing about being practical. I mean, we have to see the different countries in different measures. So, of course, I would not argue in favor to go back to nuclear energy in Germany, because we decided to go for fossil fuel free world and energy production. And if there are other countries, then we might need some more time to do the same path. But the path itself, it's very clear for me. So like going back to nuclear, it sounds maybe a bit like the more stoneless way ahead, but in the end, I think it's not the one that will prevail. So it might for the very short term, for some countries, be like a small solution to do something and to achieve something, but in the end we have to really go for nuclear free way forward. So that is my position on that. Thank you.
Carsten, thank you so much, and also thank you for not dodging the question that was raised in the Q&A. I wanted to draw our attention to another question that was actually posed by a person that some of us know quite well, Ursula Schäfer-Preuß. Hello, Ursula, from here. We can't see you, but we saw your question, and the question was one that was more practical. It was about how can we bring about more intense cooperation with players such as the African Union? And I remember, if I remember correctly, I think also Jeff talked about the necessity to sort of build bridges to these regional institutions and organizations if we are serious about implementing the agenda. So I don't know who wants to address this question from a European perspective. What's being done, I think, with the African Union with regular summits is well known. But you know, is there more than can be done or perhaps should be done on this issue? Is a question that was raised by our listeners. I don't know who feels like they're qualified to discuss this question.
Well, I would leave it to Evan, but if Evan likes me to answer, there's no problem in responding to that. So depends on I should do that or you should do that. I can't hear
you go first, Udo, and then we'll bring in Evan.
So I now I understand. Yes. I think the question of Ursula points to the exactly the right idea. We are sitting here today talking to each other, having speakers here in New York, having speakers in Italy. Where's the Global South? We tried our very best in our visit during these days to incorporate speakers from the Global South in our listening exercise, but we are totally committed to the idea that this cannot be a one-off. We have to continue that kind of collaboration. There is a dear need to incorporate strategies, owned strategies by countries from the Global South. And this is also, I think it was a right move by Olaf Scholz to invite countries more than the G7 to Bavaria to talk about with Indonesia, with Senegal, with South Africa, listening to them and to also asking them what could be a possible contribution of our collaboration to sustainable progress. And that has to be institutionalized. So only if we take the chance of the high-level political forum a couple of days ahead, if we make our collaboration continuous, if also in our financial instruments, we motivate partners to make their own claim. How do you develop an African country having enough sun, having enough natural resources, having wind, having water? You don't need to build new nuclear power plants, but you need the infrastructure to make sure that you can have financial resources to invest in the future and that you have an equipment of educated people, of social infrastructure, of technical infrastructure that you can run your own country in your own capacity and have a self-sustainable development. So that is the job of tomorrow, and we stand ready to doing that. I will also refer to one element that was raised by Phoebe. She quoted Enrico Giovannini. Enrico Giovannini is now a very important minister in the cabinet of Mario Draghi. He is the Minister for Ecological Transformation and for Infrastructure. And before that, he is a well-known academic in Italy. And he founded, which is perhaps for the one or the other person surprisingly to hear, the biggest social movement for support of the SDGs in Italy. The biggest SDG supporter movement worldwide. And that indicates the two angles of our possible improvements. First of all, we need to collaborate with civic society because the forces of change, the forces that we need, the power to organize practical change, get real in everyday life is in civic society. And secondly, we have to partner, we have to twin on an international scale. Only if we bring together local authorities, private corporations with ownership in the Global South, if we enable policymakers to meet themselves regularly, to exchange on their agenda, there is hope. And to answer then, hopefully, Jimena's question, where's the light? The light is in common understanding and improved collaboration.
Thank you, Udo. I would suggest that we now turn our attention to Evan and then give Jimena maybe the last minute of our discussion today to try to maybe fill us in on how you reflect on this discussion today. With 3 members of the European Parliament, you have heard sort of their political priorities. They have been reflecting on their conversation here in New York with high-ranking UN staff and members of the international community. And perhaps you might want to share one recommendation for us as representatives of civil society and to progressives in the European Parliament. So if that's okay with everyone, and I don't hear any vetoes, then I would suggest that Evan goes first and then Jimena goes next.
Thank you very much. First of all, maybe I also just very fastly want to touch up on the issue of nuclear power plants. I think that it might be in a short term environmentally smart, but it's not for sure sustainable at all. And this is something that I think that we need to take into account. And then also, instead of putting energy or power into sustaining something that is not sustainable in the long term, we should put the money and the energy on solar energy, on hydropower energy, on wind energy, and instead of focus on the things that I think at least is right and that is not in a short nor long term damaging our planet. When it comes to the cooperations with organizations or regional organizations, as for example the AU, we have the EU Summit, for example, which I think is a very important platform. But one of the most important things, and that I think have become very evident during these days also for all of us three MEPs, is that we need to understand that one of the most important things in cooperation is trust. And one of the most important things in cooperation is also equal partnership. That the EU cannot just go in and dictate exactly how things should be. That also it takes two to tango in the sense of cooperation also. And this is something that I think we need to have in mind as the European Union in all our cooperation to ensure to strengthen cooperations, and especially in this time of polarization globally, and as very rightly have been mentioned by all the speakers, with the horrific invasion of Ukraine, we have seen that our multilateral structures, the international law, has been questioned and is right now we need to, with all means, be defended. So in that context, we also need to ensure that we all defend it together, and everybody feel that international law, multilateralism is for everybody and not just for few to dictate how things should be interpreted. So in that sense, I would like to just summarize it, that the words of equal partnership and trust are essential to ensure to strengthen the cooperation with both African countries, African Union, but also Latin Americans and other countries around the world from the side of the European Union.
Evan, these were great last words. Now Jimena has to do better. So.
No, I don't think I can. I think that the speakers have been really fantastic. And I do thank the honesty of both Carsten and Udo. I think this type of engagement is really key, Michael. And I think that you're playing such a key role in opening these channels of communication. And as Udo mentioned, it's time to get real. So what does that mean, in practice? How do we make sure that the conversations at the global level have implications at the national and local levels, right? How do we really build these governance structures, both horizontally and vertically, so that our good intentions, our goodwill are then marked by commitments and then by implementation? How are the big flagship projects now committed by the EU really have the effect that they've been designed for, both in digital and in climate? And as Phoebe mentioned, I thought this was a really beautiful quote when she said that the poorest are also the most biodiverse, right? So how can we then support the most biodiverse countries, as Evan mentioned, into this new world of renewables? Can we invest more on solar, on wind, to provide a new matrix, a new and build and sort of try to level the playing field in terms not only of power, but also in terms of energy and in terms of building our future together. So I think that it's important just to continue strengthening these conversations and then following up on governance that then allows us to walk the talk, basically. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And with this, I would like to call this conversation to an end. Obviously, this is just the beginning of a longer conversation. We are all looking forward to the high-level political forum taking place in New York in the coming week. And I certainly feel that this was a wonderful primer to prepare all of us for the discussions that are ahead and what to look out for. And with this, I would like to thank our participants from near and far, and of course also our panelists and the very helpful people who made all of this possible technically. Thank you very much. I hope that we'll see each other again very shortly. Thanks for the great questions in the Q&A. And yeah, let's not give up the fight. Thank you so much. Take care.